Howdy, folks. The Anti-partisan John Means here from NoPartySystem.com. And I wanted to talk about cognitive dissonance. It's a term that we all know, but it's worth some more explanation. Anyone who's listening to this probably knows what cognitive dissonance is, or they think they know what it is. And if you're not familiar, then please check out Wikipedia, do a Google search, and learn about it, because it's a concept worth understanding. But I'll go ahead and give a short summary. Cognitive dissonance is a state of mental stress caused by being confronted with information or ideas contrary to one's own deeply held beliefs. It can influence people in a lot of ways, and the most common reactions are ignoring information, lashing out in anger at information, or seeking to justify and rationalize the information. And of course, you don't need to be a psychologist to recognize this behavior in others. And just hearing that description, we should all be able to recall seeing the behavior in others and perhaps even experiencing it ourselves. But for many people in the awareness movement who are aware of this condition and experience it in others, they don't seem quite so good at recognizing this condition in themselves. Most truthers and activists seem to think that since they've learned a dirty little secret or two, known to millions of others of people as well, that they've overcome some sort of internal block, and now they no longer suffer from cognitive dissonance. And sadly, for a lot of those people, rather than gaining clarity and stability from some of the harder realities in the world, instead they plunge into even greater depths of cognitive dissonance by seeking to validate their beliefs with further justifications and logical conclusions. Even after dictating the principles of algebra, Isaac Newton spent decades trying to find a numerical prophecy in the much altered Bible. So it's a condition that even really, really bright people experience too. It's not like it's a sign of being stupid or being incompetent. But during more than a decade of activism and research and deep thought on issues, I've tried to understand cognitive dissonance and find ways to overcome it in others. And it's not easy, and it's flat out impossible with some people who are really deeply invested in their beliefs. But it can be accomplished with many people, especially in these days of rising unrest. It just takes time and patience and practice and the ability to suspend our own cognitive dissonance long enough to connect with another person. So here's some of the tips and strategies I use to try to dispel cognitive dissonance in others. And they aren't always 100% successful, but I hope they'll be useful to you. First, and the most important thing to keep in mind at all times, is to be aware of your own cognitive dissonance. Yes, you have cognitive dissonance. We all do. The reason we have cognitive dissonance is very simple. As we learn and grow, the education, habits, and other input, they burn actual pathways, neural pathways into our brains that will become the familiar route for specific ideas to travel in your mind. And when confronted with information contrary to your beliefs, the thoughts can't travel easily along the same neural pathways. And this triggers basically a defense mechanism in our psyche that's trying to warn us that our thoughts are not consonant. And this isn't pseudoscience. This is the way the brain works, And it's being mapped right now by neurology think tanks. You should Google it and read about it. It's very interesting. But, it's very possible to redirect those neural pathways in our brains. And people do it all the time when they're changing their lifestyles. Weight loss, addiction, etc. You're effectively rewiring your brain to accommodate these new habits. But that's usually just changing one aspect of their thought patterns. And I don't mean to minimize that in any way, especially as I'm trying to gain better health in my life. I know just how hard it is to change deeply rooted habits. But as I say, that's changing one aspect. And for many of us who have a degree of social awareness or a realization of truth, it's been a long process of realizations. And each one represents a new pathway trying to be physically rerouted in our mind. It's no wonder that it can be unhinging for a lot of people. Now, you could spend 2 decades in Tibet at Hindu and Buddhist monasteries like Jesus did and completely rewire your brain. But by the end of the process, you probably really won't care about all this bullshit. Or you might even resign yourself to torture and murder at the hand of angry partisans. But for those of us who recognize a need to take action right now, we need to understand the physiology of cognitive dissonance to learn to recognize how it manifests in others. Anger, frustration, depression, and even hysterical joy can all be reactions to cognitive dissonance. And we need to seek to understand how it affects our perceptions and actions so we can use this to feel out other people for where they're at. If a particular topic of discussion often makes you frustrated and defensive, then you need to be able to identify it as cognitive dissonance, which is trying to force you to allow your ingrained thought process to resume. And after learning to recognize the reaction in yourself, you'll find it becomes easier and easier to suspend your beliefs on an issue and view them from a detached, almost third-person perspective. And while it does get easier to do, you'll still occasionally bump into some big walls of cognitive dissonance in your thoughts that you don't even realize are there. Now, more than 10 years after starting this activism movement, I'm sure that I'll never be rid of it all. But just being aware that the cognitive dissonance is there, it gives us a greater understanding about ourselves, if nothing else. The next step in overcoming cognitive dissonance is to refuse to allow other people to define your responses. And I mean, this really doesn't require a great deal of explanation. It's a lesson most of our parents taught us growing up, but unfortunately, most people never quite master the skill. We know damn well that people are trying to get us pissed off while we're debating them on socio-political issues, but so often we just give in to our cognitive dissonance and, call people the assholes that they are. And it accomplishes less than nothing. It serves to encourage the asshole by offering them the resistance that they seek. And here's the reason. To resist a thing is to validate and empower that thing. I don't often like to use metaphors. They're really weighty, but of course they're excellent communication tools. And for me, this concept, it helps to think of it as a boulder sitting in your path. The boulder's blocking your way, and it's offering no resistance. But if you try to move it, then it will use as much force as gravity allows it to resist you. You've validated the boulder's position, and you've given it the strength to resist you, just by attempting to move it. When often it's easier just to walk around. And I find that's a metaphor that really applies to a lot of debate and discussion. We know people are going to throw boulders and traps in our path during debate, and they'll be expecting predictable responses. Don't prove them right. Change the narrative. Sticks and stones. Next, let other people define the problem and the solution. If you're reading this, then most likely your intent in activism is to affect actual change and reform and achieve a more civil and empathetic and prosperous world for everyone. I know I greatly wish that, especially for the sakes of my daughter's future and their children to come. And that being the case, we shouldn't be afraid to explore the possibility that we are wrong in our beliefs. I mean, after all, isn't that what we're seeking to encourage other people to consider that they might be wrong? As well, we have no reason to avoid letting other people question our conclusions, and should even encourage people to define the flaws in our logic. Ask other people what they think. Even encourage them to explain their position in more detail. Ask them what they think the ultimate solution to a problem is. And, often you'll find that a person can talk themselves out of their own position if you just keep pointing out the path to them. And then, of course, you'll catch more flies with honey. Don't be afraid to grease people up with some backhanded compliments. Say something like, hey, you're obviously a well-educated, informed person. I don't understand how you could support such and such idea. Or, listen, I know a strong, independent woman like yourself has well-placed values. But if you really believe that yada, 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 most of the time it really will be a good, smart person that you're talking to who has a deep emotional investment in their views, just like we do. So, just acknowledging another person's humanity is truthfully one of the most beneficial things you could do to bridge these chasms of ideology and partisanship that separate us. The responses you'll get from people will really reveal a lot about their nature, and even if it's worth carrying on a conversation with them, you'll have to use your own experience and judgment in that regard, but it's a good way to feel somebody out, to offer them a little compliment and see how they react. Now, my final tip for overcoming cognitive dissonance is that you should never expect immediate results, ever. Don't ever think you're going to talk to somebody and change their mind right now. It's not going to happen. Ultimately, we should view every debate or interaction not as some fisticuffs brawl, but as an opportunity to leave a poisoned thought with a person that they'll never be able to get or forget, and they'll always have to argue with themselves to justify for the rest of their lives. That is the real trick. You're not going to change their mind right now, but you might leave a thought with them that does it later. Insults are really quickly forgotten, and facts can be portrayed from a whole bunch of perspectives. And unfortunately, what's really needed to influence somebody's opinion, what makes one of these really potent, poisoned thoughts, is rhetoric. Like the hook of a good song that sticks in your mind and makes you want to sing along. It needs to be really short and to the point, just one or two sentences, no more than 20 or 30 words. That's really all the attention span you're going to count on. You can count on getting from anybody. So try to get your thoughts condensed into such a way that you can really present it that easily. And save these comments. Write them down. They'll be really useful tools that you get to use over and over again. I'm going to leave off with two more things, not directly relative to cognitive dissonance, but concepts that I feel like have really helped me understand and interact with this crazy world more functionally. First of all, don't let people change the subject. Once the subject is changed and you accept it, you've lost the debate, period. Stay on point with your argument, always. And finally, I want to share a few thoughts and a quote from Bruce Lee. And while these ideas seem physical in nature, they are actually thought processes that take a good deal of practice to use effectively, and they very much apply to reasoning and debate as well. Bruce Lee's martial art is called Jeet Kune Do, which translates to the art of the intercepting foot or fist. And one of the core principles of this art is that all interaction offers opportunity. So, for example, if an opponent is throwing a punch or a kick at you, and your intent is to block it aside, then don't just deflect the blow, but make your action a strike that will also hurt the incoming limb and be an effective attack as well as a block. And this duality of motion applies in other ways too. In a particular video that I've been having trouble finding, Bruce demonstrates how to make fluid motions by throwing a kick and a punch at the same time. Not as two different motions, but in one single motion. And I'd encourage people to try it, not like some kung fu master, but minimally as a mental exercise, just to see how difficult it is. Try to throw a punch and a kick at the same time. It's entirely a process of thought before it can ever be achieved. And while I wouldn't claim to be good at it, it is an exercise that I feel has improved my mental and physical reflexes over the years. One of my favorite quotes from Bruce is this, and I'm paraphrasing. He said, "Be like water. If you pour water into a cup, it becomes the cup. If you pour it into a vase, it becomes the vase. Water can flow or water can crash. Be like water, my friends." And now that may seem like some hooky metaphysical nonsense, but it's a simple philosophy worthy of some thought, and you'll find many applications for it if you keep those words in mind. So those are my thoughts on overcoming cognitive dissonance. I hope the ideas are useful to you in debate and activism. Don't be afraid to engage people. Suspend your belief, shed your isms, strive to seek understanding and reject partisanship. That's where solutions can be found. We're all in this together, so we need to find reasons to connect with each other. Well, thank you so much for listening. Please, I'd love to hear your comments. Please comment, tell me what you think. Of course, let us know if there's any other ideas or issues that you'd like to talk about. As always, please check out the website, nopartysystem.com, full social network dedicated just to politics. And I hope I see you there. Thanks for listening, everybody. Have a good one. Peace.
This is what it is, okay? I said empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend.